In the sweltering summer of 1492, as the bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang out across the 7 hills of Rome, a new pope ascended to the throne of Christianity. Rodrigo Borgia, now Pope Alexander VI, knelt before the altar in his magnificent papal robes, the weight of the triple crown settling upon his graying head like destiny itself. The assembled cardinals watched in silence, some with reverence, others with barely concealed contempt. Few could have predicted that this moment would unleash one of history's most devastating campaigns of character assassination, a relentless barrage of accusations so shocking and persistent that they would echo through the centuries long after the last Borgia had turned to dust. The whispers began almost immediately. In the shadowy corners of Roman palazzos, in the bustling marketplaces where merchants hawked their wares, in the smoky taverns where diplomats gathered to trade secrets and gold, the rumors spread like wildfire through dry wheat. Rodrigo Borgia, they said, was not merely corrupt in the traditional ways of Renaissance prelates. He was not simply guilty of simony, nepotism, or the keeping of mistresses. No, the accusations leveled against the new pope struck at something far more fundamental, something that violated the deepest taboos of Christian society. They whispered that he had committed incest with his own daughter, the beautiful and ambitious Lucrezia Borgia. To understand the true horror of these allegations, one must first grasp the world in which they emerged. Renaissance Rome was a city of contradictions, where sacred and profane existed in an uneasy dance of mutual dependence. The papal court was simultaneously the spiritual center of Christendom and one of Europe's most ruthless political machines. Cardinals lived like princes, maintaining private armies and conducting affairs of state with the same calculating precision they brought to matters of theology. Murder was commonplace, bribery was expected, and sexual indiscretion was so routine that it barely raised an eyebrow among the sophisticated Roman elite. Yet even in this morally flexible environment, certain boundaries remained absolute. Incest stood at the very top of this hierarchy of forbidden acts, more shocking than murder, more damning than heresy. It represented not merely a violation of divine law, but a complete breakdown of the natural order that God had established to govern human society. A man who would violate his own daughter was a man who had abandoned all pretense of civilization, who had descended into a realm of bestial corruption that placed him beyond redemption. The genius of the incest allegations lay precisely in their extremity. Unlike accusations of political corruption or even murder, which could be explained away as the unfortunate necessities of statecraft, charges of incest admitted no such rationalization. They painted their target as fundamentally inhuman, a monster wearing the mask of a man. More importantly, from a practical standpoint, they were virtually impossible to disprove. How does one definitively establish that an intimate relationship did not occur between family members who lived in the same household and were frequently seen together in private? The orchestration of this campaign reveals the sophisticated nature of Renaissance propaganda warfare. The accusations did not emerge randomly or spontaneously. They were carefully crafted and strategically deployed by Rodrigo's enemies, chief among them Cardinal Giuliano della Rovere, who had lost the papal election to Borgia and burned with resentment at his defeat. Della Rovere, who would later become Pope Julius II, understood that conventional political opposition would be insufficient to bring down a pope who commanded the loyalty of the College of Cardinals and the resources of the papal treasury. Instead, he and his allies launched what we might recognize today as a comprehensive disinformation campaign. They commissioned pamphlets and broadsheets that circulated throughout Italy and beyond, each one more salacious than the last. These publications, printed on cheap paper and sold for a few coins in markets and taverns, carried lurid illustrations and detailed accounts of supposed Borgia orgies. They described elaborate feasts where Lucrezia allegedly served as both hostess and participant in unspeakable acts with her father and brothers. The pamphlets were masterpieces of psychological manipulation. They combined just enough factual information about the Borgia family to establish credibility with wild fantasies designed to shock and titillate their readers. They described Lucrezia's beauty in loving detail, emphasizing her golden hair and pale skin in ways that made her seem both angelic and corrupted. They cataloged the expensive gifts that Rodrigo lavished upon his daughter, transforming paternal affection into evidence of illicit desire. Every public appearance of father and daughter together was reinterpreted through the lens of scandal, every private conversation imagined as a prelude to sin. The campaign was remarkably sophisticated in its understanding of human psychology. The pamphlets did not simply make accusations, they invited readers to participate in the process of condemnation. They posed rhetorical questions that seemed to offer multiple interpretations, while actually guiding readers toward predetermined conclusions. Why, they ask, did the Pope spend so much time alone with his daughter? Why did he insist on personally arranging her marriages, rather than delegating such matters to subordinates? Why did Lucrezia's husbands seem to meet such unfortunate ends? These questions were particularly insidious because they exploited the natural human tendency to find patterns and assign meaning to coincidence. The fact that Lucrezia's first marriage was annulled could be explained by perfectly legitimate political considerations, but in the context of incest allegations, it became evidence of a father's jealous possessiveness. The mysterious death of her second husband, Giovanni Sforza, was almost certainly the result of the complex web of Italian politics, but the pamphlets transformed it into the act of a father eliminating a rival for his daughter's affections. The Borgia family's response to these attacks reveals both their political acumen and their fundamental misunderstanding of the nature of the threat they faced. Rodrigo initially attempted to combat the rumors through traditional means. He issued papal bulls condemning the spread of false information about his family. He used his considerable influence to pressure Italian princes to suppress the circulation of anti-Borgia pamphlets in their territories. He even resorted to violence, ordering the arrest and execution of several prominent pamphleteers. These efforts, however well-intentioned, only served to fuel the flames of scandal. Each papal bull denying the incest allegations was interpreted as evidence that the charges had struck close to the truth. Why, after all, would an innocent man protest so vigorously? The suppression of pamphlets was seen as proof that the Borgias had something to hide, while the execution of their accusers transformed them into martyrs for the cause of truth. Lucrezia herself became both victim and unwitting accomplice in this campaign of character assassination. Her natural intelligence and political awareness, which should have been assets in navigating the treacherous waters of Renaissance politics, were instead transformed into evidence of her corruption. When she served as regent of Spoleto during her father's absence, efficiently managing the affairs of the province and demonstrating considerable administrative skill, her competence was attributed to the unnatural intimacy of her relationship with the Pope. How else, the pamphleteers ask, could a young woman possess such detailed knowledge of papal business? The tragedy of Lucrezia's situation was that any action she took could be twisted to support the narrative of her corruption. If she appeared in public with her father, it was evidence of their improper closeness. If she avoided such appearances, it was proof that she was hiding something shameful. If she seemed happy and confident, it demonstrated her shameless acceptance of sin. If she appeared troubled or withdrawn, it revealed her guilt and inner torment. The incest allegations also served a broader political purpose beyond the destruction of the Borgia family. They were part of a larger campaign to undermine the legitimacy of the papacy itself during a period of intense religious and political upheaval. The late 15th and early 16th centuries witnessed the rise of powerful nation-states that increasingly challenged papal authority in temporal matters. Kings and emperors, who had once deferred to Rome, now sought to establish their independence from papal interference in their domestic affairs. The Borgia scandal provided these rulers with a powerful weapon in their struggle against papal supremacy. If the Pope himself was guilty of the most heinous sins imaginable, how could he claim moral authority over Christian princes? The French King Charles VIII used Borgia corruption as justification for his invasion of Italy, claiming that he was acting to purify the Church. The Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian similarly cited papal scandal as grounds for his resistance to Vatican policies. This instrumentalization of the incest allegations reveals their true nature as political weapons rather than genuine moral concerns. The same princes who expressed horror at Rodrigo's supposed sins maintained courts that were notorious for their own sexual excesses. The same cardinals who whispered about Borgia corruption were themselves guilty of simony, nepotism, and various forms of sexual misconduct. The difference was not in their behavior, but in their political vulnerability. The effectiveness of the incest campaign also depended on the particular characteristics of Rodrigo and Lucrezia Borgia that made them vulnerable to such attacks. Rodrigo was a foreigner in Rome, a Spaniard in a city dominated by Italian families who had controlled papal politics for generations. His rapid rise to power, achieved through a combination of political skill and financial resources, generated resentment among those who felt displaced by his success. The fact that he made no attempt to hide his paternal affection for his children, or his pride in their accomplishments, provided ammunition for those seeking to destroy him. Lucrezia's beauty and intelligence, which should have been advantages, became liabilities in this context. Her striking appearance made her a natural focus for male attention, which could then be reinterpreted as evidence of improper relationships. Her quick wit and political awareness marked her as dangerous in an age when powerful women were automatically suspect. The combination of beauty, intelligence, and political influence in a single woman was seen as inherently threatening to the established order. The pamphleteers understood this dynamic perfectly. They portrayed Lucrezia not as a victim of her father's lust, but as an active participant in corruption, a woman who used her sexual power to advance her family's political interests. This portrayal served multiple purposes. It made the incest allegations more believable by suggesting that both parties were willing participants. It also tapped into deep-seated fears about female sexuality and political power that resonated with contemporary audiences. The international dimension of the scandal campaign cannot be overlooked. The accusations against the Borgias spread far beyond Italy, carried by diplomats, merchants, and travelers to courts across Europe. Each retelling added new details and embellishments as the story was adapted to local tastes and political circumstances. In France, where anti-papal sentiment was strong, the allegations were presented as evidence of Italian corruption and Spanish barbarism. In Germany, where religious reform movements were gaining strength, they were used to argue for the need to purify the church through radical change. The printing press played a crucial role in the dissemination of these stories. The technology was still relatively new in the late 15th century, but it had already revolutionized the speed and scale at which information could spread. Pamphlets about the Borgias could be printed in Venice, smuggled to Paris, translated into French, and distributed throughout the kingdom within a matter of weeks. This represented a quantum leap in the potential reach and impact of propaganda campaigns. The visual dimension of the anti-Borgia propaganda was particularly important. The pamphlets were illustrated with woodcut images that depicted the alleged incestuous relationships in graphic detail. These illustrations served multiple functions. They made the pamphlets accessible to illiterate audiences, they provided a form of entertainment that ensured wide circulation, and they created vivid mental images that were difficult to forget or dismiss. The artists who created these images were skilled propagandists who understood how to manipulate visual symbols to maximum effect. They portrayed Rodrigo as a grotesque figure, emphasizing his age and corpulence to make the idea of sexual desire seem more repulsive. They depicted Lucrezia as simultaneously innocent and corrupted, beautiful but tainted, creating a complex emotional response that combined sympathy with condemnation. The religious symbolism in these illustrations was particularly sophisticated. The artists filled their compositions with Christian imagery turned upside down. Crosses appeared broken or inverted, angels wept or turned away in horror, and sacred vessels were used for profane purposes. These visual elements reinforced the message that the Borgias represented not merely personal corruption, but a fundamental violation of Christian order. The campaign against the Borgias also exploited existing prejudices about Spanish character and culture. Italy in the late 15th century was experiencing a complex relationship with Spain, which was emerging as a major European power under the unified crown of Ferdinand and Isabella. Many Italians viewed Spanish influence with suspicion, seeing it as a threat to their traditional independence and cultural superiority. The Borgias scandal was therefore presented not just as the corruption of a particular family, but as evidence of Spanish barbarism infecting the sacred institutions of Rome. The pamphleteers emphasized Rodrigo's Spanish origins, his connections to the Spanish court, and his appointment of Spanish cardinals to important positions. They suggested that incest was somehow characteristic of Spanish culture, a barbarous practice that civilized Italians would never tolerate. This xenophobic dimension of the campaign reveals the sophisticated understanding of audience psychology that characterized Renaissance propaganda. The accusations were not presented as abstract moral judgments, but as threats to Italian identity and independence. They transformed opposition to the Borgias into a form of patriotic resistance against foreign domination. The gendered nature of the attacks on Lucrezia deserves particular attention. In an age when women's sexuality was seen as inherently dangerous and in need of strict control, accusations of sexual impropriety carried special weight. A woman who was believed to have engaged in incest was not merely immoral, she was a fundamental threat to social order. She represented the chaos that would result if female sexuality were allowed to operate outside the bounds of male control. The pamphleteers exploited these fears by portraying Lucrezia as a woman who had gained inappropriate power through sexual manipulation. They suggested that she influenced papal policy through her intimate relationship with Rodrigo, that she used her body to advance her family's political interests, and that she represented a new and dangerous type of female political actor. This portrayal was particularly damaging because it contained elements of truth twisted beyond recognition. Lucrezia was indeed politically influential, but through her intelligence and administrative ability rather than sexual manipulation. She did serve as a trusted advisor to her father, but in the same way that many Renaissance princes relied on family members for counsel and support. The pamphleteers took these legitimate aspects of her role and reinterpreted them through the lens of sexual scandal. The long-term impact of the incest allegations extended far beyond their immediate political purpose. They became embedded in popular culture and historical memory in ways that their original creators could never have anticipated. The image of the corrupt and incestuous Borgias became a standard reference point for discussions of papal corruption, political manipulation, and the dangers of unchecked power. This cultural legacy reveals the ultimate success of the propaganda campaign. Even as the specific political circumstances that gave rise to the allegations faded into history, the core narrative persisted. The Borgias became symbols of everything that was wrong with Renaissance culture, embodiments of the moral corruption that supposedly characterized the period. The persistence of these allegations also reflects the particular power of sexual scandal to capture and hold public attention. Stories of political corruption or military failure may be forgotten as circumstances change, but tales of sexual transgression have a timeless quality that ensures their survival across generations. The incest allegations against the Borgias tapped into fundamental human anxieties about family, sexuality, and power that transcend specific historical moments. Modern historians have worked diligently to separate fact from fiction in the Borgia story, but their efforts have had limited impact on popular perceptions. The image of the incestuous papal family has become so deeply embedded in cultural consciousness that it resists correction through scholarly research. This represents perhaps the ultimate triumph of Renaissance propaganda, the creation of a historical narrative so compelling that it survives even after its factual foundations have been thoroughly undermined. The Borgia case also provides important insights into the nature of political scandal more generally. It demonstrates how accusations of personal misconduct can be used to undermine political legitimacy, how sexual transgression can be weaponized for political purposes, and how propaganda campaigns can create lasting damage that extends far beyond their original targets. The sophistication of the anti-Borgia campaign reveals the emergence of what we might recognize as modern techniques of character assassination. The systematic use of multiple media platforms, the careful crafting of messages for different audiences, the exploitation of existing prejudices and anxieties, and the creation of visual materials designed to create lasting impressions all anticipate later developments in political communication. The international scope of the campaign also prefigures the global nature of modern scandal. The allegations against the Borgias spread across national boundaries with remarkable speed, adapted to local circumstances while maintaining their core narrative structure. This demonstrates the early emergence of what we might call a European public sphere, a shared space of communication and debate that transcended traditional political boundaries. The gendered dimensions of the Borgia scandal also provide important insights into the historical relationship between sexuality and political power. The different ways in which Rodrigo and Lucrezia were portrayed reveal the complex intersection of gender, sexuality, and political authority in Renaissance culture. While Rodrigo was condemned for his supposed sexual appetites, he was still portrayed as fundamentally masculine in his exercise of power. Lucrezia, by contrast, was depicted as using sexuality to gain inappropriate political influence, a portrayal that reflected deep anxieties about women's relationship to power. As we examine the mechanics of this campaign of character assassination, we begin to see how the incest allegations against the Borgias represented something new in the history of political warfare. They were not simply personal attacks or expressions of moral outrage, but carefully orchestrated propaganda operations designed to achieve specific political objectives. They demonstrated the power of sexual scandal to transcend traditional boundaries of class, nationality, and political affiliation, creating a shared narrative that could unite diverse opponents against a common enemy. The success of this campaign would have profound implications for the future of papal politics and European political culture more generally. It established precedents for the use of sexual scandal as a political weapon that would be followed by countless later practitioners. It demonstrated the vulnerability of even the most powerful institutions to sustained campaigns of character assassination, and it revealed the growing importance of public opinion as a factor in political legitimacy, anticipating developments that would become central to modern democratic politics. The transformation of the Borgia family from historical figures into cultural symbols represents one of the most successful character assassinations in human history. The incest allegations, originally crafted as weapons in the political struggles of Renaissance Italy, became embedded in popular consciousness with such tenacity that they continue to shape perceptions more than 5 centuries later. This remarkable persistence reveals not only the skill of the original propagandists, but also the particular power of sexual scandal to capture and hold public imagination across generations and cultures. The legacy of the Borgia scandal extends far beyond the specific individuals it targeted. It established patterns of political attack and defense that would be repeated countless times in subsequent centuries. It demonstrated the potential for propaganda campaigns to create lasting damage that extends far beyond their original political purposes, and it revealed the complex relationship between historical truth and cultural memory, showing how carefully crafted narratives can become more powerful than the facts they claim to represent. As we move forward in our examination of the Borgia story, we must keep in mind this fundamental distinction between the historical family and the cultural symbol they became. The real Borgias were complex individuals operating in a complex political environment, making choices that reflected the constraints and opportunities of their particular historical moment. The symbolic Borgias, by contrast, became repositories for anxieties and fantasies about power, corruption, and sexuality that transcend any specific historical context. Understanding this distinction is crucial for appreciating both the immediate impact of the incest allegations and their long-term cultural significance. The campaign against the Borgias succeeded not only in damaging their contemporary political position, but in creating a lasting narrative that would influence European culture for centuries to come. This dual success represents perhaps the ultimate achievement of Renaissance propaganda, the creation of a story so compelling that it transcends its original purpose to become a permanent part of human cultural memory. The methods used to destroy the Borgias would be refined and repeated by countless later practitioners of political warfare. The basic techniques of character assassination pioneered in the campaign against Rodrigo and Lucrezia can be seen in operation throughout subsequent European history, from the attacks on Marie Antoinette during the French Revolution to the propaganda campaigns of the 20th century. The Borgia precedent established the template for how sexual scandal could be used to undermine political authority, a template that remains relevant in contemporary political culture. The international dimension of the Borgia scandal also prefigured later developments in global communication and political influence. The speed with which allegations spread across national boundaries, the ways in which local audiences adapted universal themes to their particular circumstances, and the creation of shared narratives that transcended traditional political divisions all anticipate the emergence of modern global media culture. Perhaps most importantly, the Borgia case demonstrates the enduring power of narrative to shape human understanding of historical events. The story of the incestuous papal family became so embedded in European culture that it influenced not only popular perceptions but also scholarly interpretations of Renaissance history. Even serious historians found it difficult to separate the documented facts of Borgia family history from the elaborate fictions created by their enemies. This phenomenon reveals something fundamental about the relationship between history and memory. Historical events do not speak for themselves. They require interpretation and narrative structure to become meaningful to later generations. The propagandists who created the Borgia scandal understood this principle intuitively, crafting stories that would resonate with deep-seated human concerns about family, power, and moral order. The persistence of the Borgia legend also reflects the particular appeal of stories that combine political intrigue with sexual transgression. Such narratives satisfy multiple psychological needs simultaneously, providing both the intellectual stimulation of political analysis and the emotional engagement of sexual drama. They allow audiences to experience vicariously the excitement of forbidden desires while maintaining their moral superiority through condemnation of the protagonists. The success of the anti-Borgia campaign thus reveals important truths about human psychology and political communication that extend far beyond the specific historical context in which it occurred. It demonstrates the power of well-crafted narratives to transcend factual accuracy, the appeal of stories that combine political and sexual themes, and the vulnerability of even the most powerful individuals to sustained campaigns of character assassination. As we prepare to examine the long-term consequences of these allegations and their impact on historical memory, we must remember that we are dealing with one of the most successful propaganda campaigns in human history. The transformation of the Borgias from Renaissance political figures into eternal symbols of corruption represents a remarkable achievement in the manipulation of public opinion and cultural memory. The techniques used to accomplish this transformation continue to influence political communication in the modern world. The basic principles of character assassination pioneered in the campaign against the Borgias can be seen in operation throughout contemporary political culture, from local elections to international diplomatic conflicts. Understanding how these techniques worked in their original context provides valuable insights into their continued effectiveness and the ways in which they might be countered or resisted. The story of the Borgia scandal thus serves as both historical case study and contemporary cautionary tale. It reveals the power of propaganda to shape not only immediate political outcomes, but also long-term cultural memory. It demonstrates the vulnerability of truth to well-crafted fiction and the difficulty of correcting false narratives once they become embedded in popular consciousness. Most importantly, it shows us that the battle for historical memory is never finally won or lost. Each generation must confront anew the challenge of distinguishing between documented fact and compelling fiction, between historical truth and cultural myth. The Borgia legend reminds us that this challenge is not merely academic, but has real consequences for how we understand power, corruption, and moral responsibility in our own time. The enduring fascination with the Borgia story reveals something profound about human nature and our relationship to power. We are simultaneously attracted to and repelled by stories of corruption and transgression, drawn to tales that confirm our worst suspicions about those who rule over us. The incest allegations against the Borgias tapped into these deep psychological currents, creating a narrative that satisfied our need to believe that power inevitably corrupts and that those who seek it are fundamentally different from ordinary moral beings. This psychological dimension helps explain why the Borgia legend has proven so resistant to historical correction. The story serves important emotional and intellectual functions that transcend its factual accuracy. It provides a way of thinking about the relationship between power and morality that feels intuitively correct to many people, regardless of what the documentary evidence actually reveals about the historical Borgia family. The transformation of historical figures into cultural symbols is never a neutral process. It reflects the needs, anxieties, and prejudices of the societies that create and maintain these symbolic meanings. The particular way in which the Borgias became symbols of corruption reveals important truths about Renaissance culture and its relationship to sexuality, power, and moral authority. The gendered dimensions of the Borgia legend are particularly revealing in this regard. The different ways in which Rodrigo and Lucrezia were portrayed and remembered reflect broader cultural assumptions about male and female sexuality, about the proper relationship between gender and political power, and about the dangers posed by women who transgress traditional boundaries. These cultural assumptions continue to influence how we think about political scandal and moral transgression in the contemporary world. The patterns established in the campaign against the Borgias can be seen in operation in modern political conflicts, media coverage of public figures, and popular entertainment that deals with themes of power and corruption. Understanding the historical origins of these patterns provides valuable perspective on their continued operation in contemporary culture. It reveals how certain ways of thinking about power, sexuality, and moral transgression became embedded in European culture during the Renaissance and continue to shape our perceptions and judgments today. The Borgia case thus serves as a window into the deeper structures of European political culture and their evolution over time. It shows us how propaganda techniques developed during the Renaissance continue to influence political communication in the modern world, how certain narrative patterns became established as standard ways of understanding political scandal, and how the relationship between historical truth and cultural memory continues to shape our understanding of the past. As we turn our attention to the long-term consequences of the incest allegations and their impact on the Borgia family's historical reputation, we must keep in mind this broader cultural context. The story we are examining is not simply about one family's rise and fall, but about the emergence of new forms of political warfare and their lasting impact on European culture and consciousness.